Hi everybody, my name is Miss Mack, and today I want to talk to you about purpose and audience. Why do we write, and who do we write for? Every single piece of writing has three things in common. It has a topic, an audience, and a purpose. And you can determine what those things are by asking yourself some questions while you're writing or before you start writing. So the first thing is your topic. That's just what you're writing about. The second thing is your audience. Who will read my writing? Or maybe who won't read this writing? And the last thing is your purpose. Why am I writing? What's the point? What do I want my reader to walk away knowing or doing because of what I've written? So today we're just going to focus on those last two. Audience, who will read my writing, and purpose, why am I writing? Before we get into a lot of details about what audience and purpose are, let's talk about why it matters and how it helps your writing. Knowing who you're writing for and why you're writing affect the choices that you make. And I think you probably already do this without knowing that's what you're doing. So let's think about a conversation about your favorite TV show, and you're trying to talk about this show with someone who's never seen it before. So you're going to avoid spoilers. You're going to explain very basic plot details of what the show's about. You're going to explain who the characters are and how they're all connected to each other. That conversation with someone who's never seen this show before sounds a lot different than a conversation between two people who watch this show. Because if you both watch the show, you can talk about things that have already happened. You can talk about what you think might happen next. You can use character names without having to stop and explain who the characters are. And the only thing different about those two conversations is the audience. Somebody who watches the show and somebody who doesn't. Another thing that purpose and audience can affect is your word choice and your vocabulary. So you wouldn't talk the same way to your teacher as you would to your grandma, as you do to your best friends, as you do to somebody who's a lot younger than you. Because you understand that different vocabulary is sometimes appropriate for different groups of people. Another thing that purpose and audience affects is sentence and paragraph length. And I think this is most apparent in books. So if you look at a picture book written for little kids, the sentences and the paragraphs are very short. Whereas books that are written for adults or older kids, the sentences are longer and more complicated. The last is your tone and your voice. Some pieces call for a more argumentative or assertive tone. For some pieces, it might be appropriate to be a little bit more conversational or informal. And for some pieces, you're going to want to take a formal or academic tone. Purpose and audience matter because understanding why you're writing and who you're writing for affect the choices that you make when you write. Now I want to look at some specific reasons people might write, or types of purposes. The first one is to persuade. When you're writing to persuade someone of something, you're trying to convince them to see your side. You are compelling your reader to take some kind of action or to think a certain way about a particular topic. A good example of this is reviews. Restaurant reviews, movie reviews, book reviews, any type of review, the reviewer is taking the stance of, I believe that you should read this book. I believe that you shouldn't eat at this restaurant. They are trying to compel a certain action in their readers and giving their opinion. Primary goal, their primary purpose is to express their opinion and convince whoever reads that to think the same way that they do about this book or this movie or whatever it is that they're reviewing, and to take some kind of action, to see that movie, to not eat at that restaurant, whatever it is. Another example of this is debates. If you watch the presidential debates on TV, or if you ever take a class on debate in school, that's all debate is. You take each side believes that they're right and has their reasons for believing that they're right. They will probably use facts to back it up, but their primary goal isn't just to express the facts. Their primary goal is to convince their audience, whoever that is, to think the way they think and to believe that they are right. So that is one type of purpose, to persuade. Another reason somebody might write, or another purpose, is to explain or inform. You see this a lot in the news or in magazines. They're not usually expressing an opinion or making an argument. They are giving just the facts, just explaining what's going on to inform their audience. Hey, this is what's going on in the world. Another example of this is research papers. You're probably not going to take an argumentative or persuasive tone with a research paper. You'll say, this is what I found out about this thing, or here are some facts about something. Your primary goal isn't to convince your reader to believe what you believe or to take a particular stance on something. Your primary goal is to teach them, to inform them of something. So we have persuasion, explanation, and then the last one is to express and explore an idea. And this is where we see a lot of creative work. So fiction, poetry, personal essays. You're not necessarily stating facts. You're not telling your audience to believe a certain way. But you're saying, hey, this is how I feel about this thing. Or listen to this cool idea that came out of my mind. Those are three big types of purposes: to persuade, to inform, and to express or explore an idea. Now I'd like to talk about just a couple of specific things to consider when you think about who your audience is. One thing to consider is, how old are they? We already talked about this a little bit with how purpose and audience affect sentence length and sentence structure, and how books for first graders aren't written the same as books for adults, because the type of information, the level of information, the level of background knowledge that a person has probably depends on their age. Another thing to think about is location and culture. If you're writing to people in Muncie, you can probably write about things in your hometown or things at your school, and they'll understand what you mean. But if you are writing to somebody who doesn't even live in the US, you're going to have to do a lot more explanation and to make sure that what you're writing about makes sense. So really, a lot of things to consider with audience is, how much does my audience already know about what I'm writing about? And a lot of that will depend on their location and their age and their culture and what kind of things that they study. Another way to look at this is, what do they already believe about my topic? This is particularly important if you're writing to persuade, because in order to persuade someone of something, you have to know, well, what do they think? How does their opinion compare to my opinion? And what can I do to convince them that my opinion is the right one? Now what I want to do is take a look at this article from Time Magazine for Kids called Up All Night, about how technology affects sleep, and see how professional writers consider their purpose and audience. So we can tell from the title of the magazine alone that this article isn't written for adults. It's written for elementary and middle school aged kids. And I think that the purpose of this particular article is to inform. It's not to entertain. It's not to persuade. It doesn't explore an idea. It is to inform about a particular topic. So how do we know this? Let's take a look at a couple of paragraphs and see what in the text tells us that. Let's start with blue. Everything I do in blue is going to be about purpose, which is to inform. So the first sentence: cell phones, tablets, and computers are keeping children and teenagers awake at night, even when they're not in use, according to new research. There's a lot of phrases like this in the article, but particularly in the first sentence, which is like the theme or the topic sentence or the thesis of the article, that tells us this isn't what the author believes. This is what JAMA Pediatrics says. We are just reporting what this says. We see a lot of this in the second paragraph too. The scientist found. There's a direct quotation from the article. these things are saying, hey, this isn't from our minds, or this isn't just something that we made up. This is real information from real scientists. But there's also no language like I believe, or I think, or because this information is true, you should do this. There's nothing. It's just saying, this is what this study found out. So let's get rid of all that. And I'm going to move into how we can tell that the author of this article knew that this was for kids and not for adults. The first thing that I noticed in the first paragraph is short sentences. There's not a lot of real long drawn out explanation. It's not babyish language, but there's not big explanations. It's just short, to the point, easy to understand. And particularly in the second paragraph, I see that they don't use a lot of jargon. They don't use a lot of scientific mumbo-jumbo, like overstimulate the mind and emotions. There's definitely a scientific term for that. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't matter. Natural timing and alertness, there's a scientific term for that. There's probably way more numbers and way more facts than they have in here. But they chose to simplify it because they knew that the audience they had would be good with this amount of information. Any more would have been boring and confusing and just not appropriate for the audience of their magazine. That's how we can tell professional writers using purpose and audience to consider their pieces. So the last thing I want to show you before I give you a chance to go off and give this a try and write by yourselves is this chart that I made of just a few of the reasons that we write and a few of the people or places that we might write to. You see that you can write for school, you can write to your teachers. Your audience could include yourself, and when you write to yourself, you can do anything you want because you know how your own brain works. You can write to government officials. You can write to mentors. You can write to fictional people, like book characters. It might be a good idea to keep this chart and add to it as you find more people to write to or more reasons to write. What else is entertaining? What other kinds of writing is persuasive? What other kind of writing do you find or do that's informative? So now that we've done a lot of talking about purpose and audience and how they affect our writing, I want to give you guys a chance to try. Your task is pretty simple. Describe your favorite place in your neighborhood and town, what you do there, and why you like it so much. The twist to this is everyone will get a card with a different person who will be reading it. So when you get your card, think about how you'll change your tone, word choice, and explanation of ideas to fit who and why you're writing. Thank you guys so much for listening to me today, and I hope that you remember something about how purpose and audience affect your writing.